research?
Sure. Thank you, Dan. I have been studying one chapter of the Bible for 5 years, and that chapter is Exodus 14, which describes the parting and the crossing of the Red Sea. There's certainly a lot to this chapter to keep me occupied for 5 years, but this is how it began. I was getting a master's degree in atmospheric and oceanic sciences at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and during the first semester, the professor was talking about wind moving the water and how the water level drops and it goes away from the former shoreline, and I said to myself, that sounds like something I read in Exodus. What was that chapter again? Of course, it was Exodus 14. And as I studied this, the levels of complexity and interest just kept increasing and increasing, and I eventually made this into my master's thesis. Wow. And so this kind of goes through the science and the faith separated with put together with these things and not separated, but working together in harmony. And that's the theological lesson I take out of the entire project. But let's begin in Goshen, 1250 BC. Okay. So that's the beginning of our story. That is the scholarly date for the Exodus with some earlier proposals, but this is kind of the date we're going to focus on. So what's happening? What's happening in the world nearby? The Hebrews have been there for many generations, for many, many hundreds of years. And so what's happening around them? First of all, about 24 years before this, the Pharaoh Ramses II had fought the Hittites to a draw at the Battle of Kadesh. And then he retreated, so he's kind of keeping himself occupied in Egypt and kind of keeping things in control. The Trojan War had probably begun about this same time, so that's happening. And in about 50 years, there's something called the Late Bronze Age collapse, where a lot of the civilizations in the Eastern Mediterranean were collapsed and a lot of cities destroyed because of the movement of the sea peoples around. So there's a lot going on outside of Goshen. And if you're going to make a trip from Egypt to Canaan and stay there, now might be the right time to move because there's a lot of turmoil coming. But here in Goshen, the Israelites have been here for hundreds of years. They're really theological infants. They don't know the name of their own God. Moses has to find out the name of the God and tell it to them. And the name of the God is I am. You should say that I am has sent you. So they obviously have some instruction in theology to go through here. And as part of the delivery from Egypt and part of going to Canaan, God is going to give them that instruction and sort of show them what's happening. They've been involved with the Israelites the Israelites have been involved with the Egyptians nearby, so they're probably familiar with some of the gods of the Egyptians and maybe even starting to believe in them. So here's a list of the 10 plagues as we go through them. Pastor Amy began on this last week, but as we go through these, we can see what's kind of happening here. First of all, the Nile turns red to blood, and the Egyptian god sort of in charge of the Nile is Hapem. And there's frogs and gnats, cattle, flies and boils. So all these things correspond to one of the gods of Egypt. And there's a lot of gods. You can't really go through the whole pantheon. But as we go through these things, the people undergoing this and reading about this later will understand, oh yeah, that's this god. And in the end, we come up to the plague of darkness, which is something having to do with the god Ra. And these are the big boys here. Osiris, the god of death, and Ra, they're the big ones. And so it sort of escalates up to that point. And again, the parting of the sea is going to be the god Nun, the god of the sea. So you might think, especially if you've been in that society for a while, okay, maybe the god of Moses is fighting the Egyptian gods and he's winning. He's more powerful than the god of gnats and frogs and wow, even darkness and light. So you might think the God of Moses is merely another God that's more powerful than these Egyptian gods. But that's not what Exodus says. Exodus says that these are natural parts of the environment in which they live. These are natural forces all in Egypt. God is in charge of all of them. There's no fight going on here between gods. There are no other gods. The only God is the God of Moses here. God is in charge of all these natural forces of the world, insects, hail, wind, the sea, and even life and death. And the Israelites learn through this experience, through these 10 plagues, that God will protect them from the dangers of the physical world. Remember that they are going into a great and terrible wilderness called the Sinai. It's coming up. And the picture on the lower right-hand corner of your slide shows the Sinai wilderness there. This is not a land flowing with milk and honey there. This is not much going on. There's big mountains, there's canyons, there's not much to eat there, and they're going to have to survive in that. So God will protect them through this physical journey that they're about to embark on. Now, we think that perhaps this is, something that happened then, and it certainly was about 3,000 years ago. What about us? Are we embarking on a great and terrible wilderness? Well, most of us live in a very comfortable place, but there are things that are outside our control. There's a worldwide sickness. We cannot control it. There's an economy that we only have a limited control over. There's things that happen in your family and in your friends that you cannot fully control either. The lesson here is that God is with us. When Moses talks to God and is kind of arguing back and forth, I don't want to do this. This is too tough for me. God doesn't tell him, oh, don't worry about it. Pharaoh's just going to roll over like a puppy. No, not at all. He says, it's going to be tough, but I will be with you. Mm-hmm. And that is a message for us today. When things are outside of our control, God will be with us. So we come to the Passover. After the 10 plagues and Pharaoh was given up. No, get out of here. That night is the night of the Passover. And this is done according to a lunar calendar, the Hebrew calendar. The first month of the year after the equinox in the spring, so this would be after March 21st, which is the equinox, the spring equinox. Then the first month, the first new moon, will mark the Hebrew month of Abib. That begins this sequence here. And the Nile is the lowest level during the spring here, so there's not going to be any planting going on. There's not that happening. Passover is 2 weeks later on the night of Abib 14 through 15. This is going to be the full moon. And if you have people that have been long living in houses and now they're going to go walk through Egypt and travel with their scared children and not know where they're going, at least they've got moonlight. They've got moonlight to walk with. So for 2 weeks, they are going to, that is the beginning of the month, and then until the night of Passover is 2 weeks, then they're probably going to walk for about a week after the full moon and get full moon during that time. So they travel for 1 week, and this map, as you see on your screen here, shows the likely route of the travel following the red line. They begin at a place called Avaris, or Ramses, which is the modern day there, and then they travel to the south and east towards Succoth, and then toward modern Ismailia, Lake Timsah, and that's Etham on the edge of the desert. There's widespread agreement over that part of the journey. After that, the trail goes cold and goes all over the place, and this is where you get all these proposals for where the crossing happened, where the route is, whether it's a north or south route. So things diverge from there, and I'm going to show you a proposal which has them hooking north and then traveling to the south of the Sinai Peninsula. So I've been traveling for 1 week with all their unleavened bread, and the moon and the full moon is gradually fading, so they're traveling. Then, according to the story, they get trapped. They are instructed to go to a very specific place, and this is in camp in front of Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal Zephon. You shall camp by it facing the sea. So there's 3 places there that are given as the instructions. This is not just any old where. This is a very specific spot. It is as if you would say somebody, where's your church? Oh, Faith Community Lutheran Church is in northwest Longmont. Go from the corner of Hover Road and Ute Highway 66, go about a half mile east of there, and that's the church. So I give you those instructions, and 3,000 years from now, do you think that'll be perfectly understandable?
Probably not.
Maybe
Probably
not. Okay, the same problem happened here. They've tried very carefully to tell us where these places are. We have no idea where these are. Right. So we sort of look at them and we say, Pi Hahiroth, that means the mouth of the canal. Well, in the Nile Delta, there's canals all over the place. So it doesn't narrow it down very much. Sorry. Okay, how about between Migdol and the sea? Well, Migdol means tower, and there's a sea. There's the Mediterranean Sea, and there's the Red Sea. Okay, that helps a little bit, but there's a lot of Migdols around. Baal Zephon. What does that mean? Scholars think it means the god of the north or the god of the sea. Either way, these places aren't known, and one of the mysteries here is trying to figure out these 3 places and locate these toponyms. But at that place, they get stuck. They're in a rotten position. The sea's ahead of them. The chariot army is pursuing behind them, and they are trapped. What follows is told in Exodus 14, and this is the miracle of deliverance. They think they're going to die, and in the morning, they're alive. Probably exhausted, maybe covered with dirt and dust, they're alive. And this is the moment where the Israelites, formerly a community, they become a nation. During that 12 hours, as they pass through the sea, that's their baptism. One side, they were a community together. On the other side, they are a nation. This is the beginning of the nation of Israel. So now back to my research here. I'm in graduate school just looking at these things happening on the screen. The professor's describing this stuff, and I think what he just described sort of sounds like what I read about in Exodus. So am I allowed to study these things? You know, is this okay? Somehow it's the Bible, but like, who's going to not like this? Who's going to get mad? So we look at Psalm 111, verse 2. Great are the works of the Lord. They are studied by all who delight in them. So what does studied mean? Certainly sit and meditate, admire, enjoy, maybe look at, maybe analyze with the tools of modern science. All those things are studying this work. So I'm going to look at this closely, and I'm just going to pretend, since we're at the University of Colorado, which is a secular university, I'm just going to pretend, suppose this just came to me. I'm a grad student in meteorology, and what can you make of this? Say, okay, well, let's look. We got a strong wind, and it's going to turn the sea into dry land. We have the wind direction. So it's coming from the east. It's turning it to dry land. It blows all night long. Since this is equinox, how about 12 hours? Okay. Waters were divided. So there's going to be water over there and over there. It's not just going to recede. It's going to divide. So how on earth can that happen? So I'm sort of puzzling through how this happens. So God sent the wind moving water. That's what oceanography is all about. Wind moves the water. The Gulf Stream, all the other gyres, the major things, the Horatio current, they're all driven by water and the rotation of the earth. So this is an excellent thing to study. So I come across something called wind set down, where there's a long body of water, very long but fairly shallow, and if wind blows along it, it's going to all pile up on the downwind side. And on the upwind side, as you see on the left side of the screen there, the bottom of the lake or the sea is going to be dry, and there's going to be an opening there where somebody could walk through. So this sounds like what we see described in Exodus. This really happens from time to time. It happens on Lake Erie when strong winds blow from the west. It happens in Florida even recently, where there's a hurricane that goes through and it spins and blows all the water out to sea, and places like certain harbors get emptied out. And there's boats high and dry there with just mud on the bottom, and the mud dries up because the wind's blowing across it. So this happens in modern day, and people look at this and they think, oh, that's interesting. And a few people say, that sounds like Exodus. Okay, so I'm not the only one who has seen something like this happen and said, that sounds like Exodus. I may have been the only one who has seen this happen in a class on dynamics of meteorology in graduate school, right. But certainly people have noticed this before. So here is a map of Sinai. And the east wind is coming from the right-hand side there. And you see Sinai is a large peninsula which is surrounded by water. On the north there is the Mediterranean Sea, and then you see the two fingers of the Red Sea there. That's the Gulf of Aqaba and the Gulf of Suez. Every body of water here has been proposed by somebody at some time to be the crossing site. So there's nothing left to propose here. People have gone all around this and say, what about here, what about here, what about here? So even the site I propose has also been proposed as well. So there's been a lot of activity trying to figure out this puzzle. And easy problems don't remain unsolved for 3,000 years. This is a hard problem. So let's take a look. But we have a clue here. The wind is going to blow from the east. And what I found is that if it's going to blow along a section of water that's long, that works the best. And when you have water that's oriented north-south and an east wind blowing, not much happens. But if the body of water is oriented east-west and winds blowing along it, that's a better candidate. So let's take a look at those, specifically Lake Manzala, which is along the Mediterranean coast of Egypt, and that is the green there is the Nile Delta. So there's been a lot of things happening here, including the Suez Canal, which bifurcated it about in a third there on the eastern side. What did it look like in 1250 BC? Well, we don't really know, but we have some old maps and conjecture, and it looks as if there was a large coastal lagoon here with a branch of the Nile coming in. But if you look at the map closely, there's this place called Magdalum there. And I look at that and I start to get excited because that sort of sounds like Migdol. And there was a between Migdol and the sea. So here, if you're between Magdalum and the sea, where are you? Well, you're kind of on that point of the peninsula there. And what's going to happen there when the wind blows? Well, if there's a body of water that's bent like this, and the water blows here, it's going to separate. And if you're Moses at the point of that peninsula, you will see water on your left and water on your right. So, wow, it parted. It parted. This is great. This is perfect. This is what I was looking for. So I'm really getting excited here. And that was only in the very beginning. That was like in the first month or so. But there's still 4 years to come of my research. So there's plenty of work to do here. But I'm excited. I have something that seems to click here and match the biblical description. So I took the terrain and kind of modified it. And this is what you're expected to do in graduate school. There's a lot of technology to throw at this problem that wasn't available even 10, 15 years ago. Modified the terrain, knowing how the Nile has prograded outward, and was eventually to reconstruct it here. And this is my reconstruction where there's these large bodies of water here. Now, we wonder if this matches sort of the account in the Bible. Well, they have a hard time getting out of Egypt. So there's a lot of ways that are blocked here. So at least we know that it ain't so easy to escape from Egypt into the Sinai wilderness. So that matches what I've got here. This is a figure from one of the scientific papers that was published in the peer-reviewed journal PLOS One. And this kind of shows my model here. So after a bunch of learning how to work these ocean models and writing Python code and working NetCDF files and things like that, I'm able to run a model. That is, I'm able to simulate this whole thing and blow a wind over it and see what happens. So are you allowed to play God? Well, here, yeah, sure, go ahead, blow the wind, that's your job. And let's see what kind of wind we can do and see what will happen. So I work out a wind about 62 miles an hour, which is about the strongest wind into which you can walk. Because the Israelites have to walk into this wind, and nobody said it's going to be any fun, but you can make forward progress in a wind about that strong. So we have blown the wind over here from the east side, and sure enough, these big mud flats are exposed there. And the brown that you see on your screen, that is the exposed bottom of the lake. Wow. And that is where you can cross. Now, here's an odd thing. Every artistic depiction I've ever seen in this has these narrow passageway for them to go across. And there's these big piles of water on either side. Well, the Bible doesn't say it was really narrow. Right. So we've been assuming that for a long time. And at the very least, what science can contribute is to kind of open up our eyes to a solution and move past our sort of expectations and get back to, is this in the Bible or is it not in the Bible? Sort of a truer fealty, following exactly what the Bible does say and doesn't say. So there's an opening here. They can make it across. This is great. And then get to the other side. It's plenty wide, so if you have a lot of Israelites, across you go. And it closes up very quickly afterwards. So as you recall from the story, the Egyptian chariot army, they tried to follow, and the waters come back very suddenly and crash upon them. So that's also what happens in this model here. So this seems to match the description as nearly as I can tell. So I still am wondering if this is accurate or not. So I'm going to pull on other disciplines here for studying this problem. One of them is archaeology. And there's an archaeologist named James Hoffmeyer who also studies this problem as well. And he is focused on this same area for reasons that have nothing to do with hydrology or oceanography or wind. He's looking strictly at names. And he is looking at this same area. And he labels this tight he labels this site T78 as Migdol of Seti. So there's the Migdol. So at least I have one professional archaeologist who says, yeah, that toponym is correct. So I'm really excited to hear some more, because several disciplines are converging on the same answer in the same site, which is really encouraging. So what I have gone so far, and so I have this ocean model and comes out with these great answers. And I have this ocean model which gives these answers, and I'm very pleased about that because it seems to match the biblical account. But when I talk to people, especially reporters in the media, they ask, well, was it a miracle? If you have a natural explanation for this, then maybe it wasn't a miracle. And I look at this and I say, well, this ocean model faithfully obeys the laws of physics. That's its job. Mass is always conserved. Gravity never stops. G is always 9.8. And force always equals mass times acceleration. So that's absolutely what's happening here. Can it still be a miracle? Is it a miracle? Let's look at another reported miracle in the Bible and from the New Testament. This is one where Jesus says, throw your net on the other side of the boat. What happens? All the fish, they pull in a full load of fish on this side of the boat and not on that side of the boat. Peter realized this is a miracle. He jumps into the water and swims to Jesus. He's not worried about laws of physics or anything. Are any fish levitating and not having force equal mass times acceleration? Of course not. They just swam to the other side. They never seemed to break the law of physics, yet of course this is a miracle. It's just fish swimming around, and of course God directed this. So, as we saw earlier in the plagues, God is in charge of the natural forces. And in certain times, he directs them to do what he wants to do to free the Israelites and to deliver them. And as we mentioned earlier, of course this is a miracle, a natural event that occurs just at the right time to save God's people. That is a miracle. And Moses, of course, had foreknowledge of this event. He put them to the right place where they were stuck, and he said, lift out your staff over the ocean. God told him to lift out your staff over the ocean, and the seas parted during that night sometime. So he's in just the right place to take advantage of this miracle. So if the night before we thought we were all going to die, us and our kids are going to die, next morning we're over there. And, you're covered with dirt, I'm covered with mud, we're exhausted, but we're all together. That is a miracle. That is absolutely a miracle. We don't care about physics. Right. We're alive. Yep. Okay? That's absolutely a miracle. The slide you see here is my proposed route for the crossing. This goes from Etham, which you see down the south, then travels north again. They have this instruction to turn back. Then God said to Moses, turn back, and then go to Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, facing Baal Zephon. So this is my best guess for what happens here. They take this jog to the north, and that's where the crossing happens. Then they go south and take the southern route, as it says elsewhere in Exodus. This spot here is east of the Suez Canal, and when I was in Egypt, I could not go over there because this is considered to be a closed military area. There's insurgencies happening in the Sinai, and so the government of Egypt wants to keep you away from there. They also consider the Suez Canal to be a closed military area, so you cannot go on that side. But this is the area that I have proposed, and this is where archaeologist James Hoffmeyer is also looking for the crossing site there. I was able to visit the west side of the Suez Canal and looked out over Lake Manzala. And Lake Manzala is this huge, huge flat sheet of water with flat land all around it. And because it is brackish, that is partly salty and partly fresh, it grows these papyrus reeds all over it. So if you're looking for something which matches the description of the Sea of Reeds, Lake Manzala is it. The term in Hebrew is Yam Suf, which means the Sea of Reeds. In the Septuagint translation of the Bible, that was translated to Red Sea. And so that's the term that has come down to us through the King James Version and a few others. So we talk about crossing the Red Sea. But the original term is the Sea of Reeds, and that is well matched by Lake Manzala, the description here. So once they go across, then they immediately go south to stay away from the Egyptian fortifications along that coastline there, along the Mediterranean coast, and they go south to the southern Sinai. So another question came up when I was talking to people about this. why do you study this? Why can't you just believe that this happened and happened there? So for me, it was just having in the beginning, having an interesting topic for my thesis research. So when you're doing research, being interested in it just keeps you going, because there's going to be a lot of divide by zero errors and modeling problems, stuff like that. You have to keep going through the difficult parts. And when you're interested in what you're doing, that gives you so much more motivation to do that. But other people would say, can we just believe this and have faith? And I think my answer is, yes, we can do that. But when it comes to the resurrection, many of the disciples had faith. Thomas wanted more evidence. And what we see here is kind of a mixture of a modern and an ancient picture of Thomas and other disciples looking at Jesus' scars from the crucifixion. He is giving them more evidence. He says, Thomas, come here and put your hand in my side. Here's more evidence for you. Blessed are those who believe. Blessed are those who see and believe after seeing the evidence we offer. So perhaps for some people, I can offer some evidence that this is plausible. This makes sense from the point of view of what we look at and from what we know of these places and of science and of natural world. God works through the natural world, and this is a marvelous thing to have happen. And this crossing is sort of the climax of all the plagues. God is in charge of all the natural portions of this earth, of the natural forces at work, and he makes these things happen, and he is always with us, no matter what's happening around us.